بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. یا دائم الفضل على البریه، یا باسط الیدین بالعطیه، یا صاحب المواهب السنیه، صل على محمد وآل خير الورى سجيا، واغفر لنا يا ذا العلا في هذه العشية. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء، وبقوتك التي غرت بها كل شيء، وخضع كل شيء، وذلل كل شيء، وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء، وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء، وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء، وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء، وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء، وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء، وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء، وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس، يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحت كل اسم، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تعبس الدعاء، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء، اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأت، اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك، وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك، وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من غربك، وأن توزعني شكرك، وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا، وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته، وأظم فيما عندك رغبته، اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكروك وزار أمرك وقلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائي ساترا ولا لشيء من أملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من غبي سترت وكم من فاد من البلاء أغلت وكم من إثار وقيت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من ثناء جميل لست ولا له نشرت. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي. يا سيدي وأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفزعني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملت في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكسلة شهواتي وقفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور أتوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأل كشف ذري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت في هوى نفسي ولم أحترس في من تزيين عدوي وقرني بما هوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء وتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك. ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي في قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي متزرا نادما منكسرا مستقيما مستغفرا منيبا مغرا مذعنا مدربا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في ساتر رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل أذني وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وفاقي. يا رب رب زأف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى علي قلبي من معرفتك وليج بي لساني من ذكرك وأتغدو ضميري من حبك وبعد الصدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك حياة أنت أكرم من أن تزيا من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت وليت شيري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادها وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر حبت من العلم بك حتى صارت خشية وعلى جوارح سعد إلى أوطان تعبدك طايا وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنا ما كذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم زافي عن قليل من بلايا الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره ألا أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكروه يسير مغاو قصير متنة فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مغامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منه أزج وأبكي لأليم العذاب وشدته أملت للبلاء ومدته فلئن سيرتني للغوبات مع دائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك فهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي أفوق فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأزجن إليك بين أهلها زجيج الآمنين ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك إن كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا قياس المفتقسين، يا قياس المفتقسين، يا أميم قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته، فزاغت مع عذابها بمعصيته، وهو بسبعين أسفاقا بجرمي وجريرته، وهو يزج إليك زجيج مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك يا مولاي. فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلم النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يورق ليبها وأنت تسمع صوتا وترى مكانا؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرا وأنت تعلم زفا؟ أم كيف يتغلغل بين أطفاقها وأنت تعلم صدقا؟ أم كيف تزجر زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إتقه منها وتترك فيها حياة؟ ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عملت بالموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أخطأ لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاهديك وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملا من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد في المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا، وتتولت بالأنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وقلبت من علي أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته، وكل ذنب أذنبته، وكل غبي أسررت، وكل جهل أملت، كتمت وأعلنت، أخفيت وأظهرت، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيت بفضلك سترت، وأن توفر عزي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسطت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي مالك رقي، يا من بيدي ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موسوعة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي يا من عليه مؤولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا رب، قف على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين، وأشتاق إلى غربك في المشتاقين، وأنوى منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فارد، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نسيبا عندك، واقربهم منزلة منك، وأخسهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك، وعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأغلني أثرتي، واغفر زلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وزمنت لهم الإجابة، فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، وبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي، ولا تخدع من فضلك رجائي، واكفني شر الجن والإنس من عدائي. يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا، اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء، فإنك فعال لما تشاء. يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى، ارحم من رأس مال الرجاء وسلاه البكاء. يا سابق النعم يا دافع النقم، يا نور المستوحشين في الظلم، يا عالما لا يعلم، صل على محمد وآل محمد، وافعل بما سهله، صلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله، وسلم تسليما كثيرا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. في شفای مریض، سلامتی آقا امام زمان رحم الله من قرأ فاتحه مع الصلوات.
السلام علیکم. سلام پیش خدمت ہے بیوی امل بنین. ام البنین مادر عباس ذی وقار، مظلومیت پہ تیری ہیں سب کے جگر فگار، رحلت پہ تیری آلے محمد ہیں اشک بار، سجاد کر رہے ہیں یہی بین بار بار، سجاد کر رہے ہیں یہی بین بار بار، صدمے اٹھا اٹھا کے جہاں سے گزر گئی، پیٹو سروں کو مادر عباس مر گئی، پیٹو سروں کو مادر عباس مر گئی، باد بطول تو نے سنبھالا علی کا گھر، کلثوم سے رہی نہیں ایک پل بھی بے خبر، بچوں پہ فاطمہ کے محبت سے کی نظر، مشغول تھیں جو خدمت زینب میں سر بسر، وہ جان سارے زینب بے پر نہیں رہی، وہ سوگوار سبط پیمبر نہیں رہی، وہ سوگوار سبط پیمبر نہیں رہی، سر پر علی کے زخم لگا جس کے سامنے، شبیر سے مدینہ چھٹا جس کے سامنے، ٹکڑے جگر حسن کا ہوا جس کے سامنے، گھر فاطمہ کا لوٹا گیا جس کے سامنے، گھر فاطمہ کا لوٹا گیا جس کے سامنے، روتی رہی جو فاطمہ کے نور عین پر، جس نے نثار کر دیے بیٹے حسین پر، جس نے نثار کر دیے بیٹے حسین پر. درود بر محمد و آل محمد.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وعجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائه من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. فقال الله الحكيم في كتابه المبين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا قوا أنفسكم وأهليكم نارا وقودها الناس والحجارة عليها ملائكة غلاد شديد لا يعصون الله ما أمرهم ويفعلون ما يؤمرون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we begin this majlis this evening on this Thursday night to remember the death anniversary of Ummul Baneen alayha salam, the mother of the four boys, the mother of Abul Fadl Abbas most prominently that we know her as, the mother who gave all that she had, although she wasn't there, but she gave her sons on the plains of Karbala. We ask Allah to begin by accepting this act of worship from us tonight. We ask Allah to allow us to have the shafaat of Baneen alayha salam on the Day of Judgment. We ask Allah to allow us to be able to make her ziyarah in Jannatul Baqi, in Madinatul Munawwara, in this dunya. And we ask Allah to keep us in the company of her sons and her family, and that we can always be in their presence and that we can learn from their lives and follow in their footsteps. For the love of Baneen alayha salam and her family, one more salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This evening, although we know that the death of Baneen alayha salam was actually a few days ago, on the Islamic calendar it was the 13th of this month of Jamadi al-Akhir, and even there are differences of opinion on the dates of her birth, the dates of her death, but most commonly within our community we mark it on the 13th. We want to kind of begin to look at a brief aspect of her life before I go to the main topic. Now the main theme I do want to look at is based on the verse I began with from the Noble Quran. I began from Surah At-Tahrim, chapter number 66, verse number 6, and I'll go into that a bit later. But just I want to begin with a bit about Baneen alayha salam. Who was she as a woman? We've probably heard a lot about her, or we've heard something about her in the past. I just want to refresh our memories about who this woman was and why is she so important. Now obviously we tie her connection and perhaps her preeminence, her importance for us is because of her relationship, her marriage to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Perhaps her connection that we have with her is because of the fact that her four boys, especially Abul Fadl Abbas alayhi salam, were sacrificed on the day of Ashura for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. Perhaps it's all of these things combined why we give her so much prominence and importance. Because if you look at the lives of the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, specifically Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Historians tell us that after the shahadat of Sayyidah Fatima Zahra alayha salam, whose martyrdom we just marked last week and prior to that, we're told in the books of history, for example, Shaykh al-Mufid in his Kitab al-Irshad, that Amir al-Mu'mineen had at least 7 wives, obviously not concurrently, but in the course of his time after the shahadat of Sayyidah Zahra. So Sayyidah Zahra alayha salam passes away, is martyred in the 11th year after the Hijrah. Amir al-Mu'mineen is martyred in the year 41. So in that span of 30 years, Amir al-Mu'mineen has at least 7 wives that are recorded in history. Now, out of those 7 wives, again, there are a difference of the number of opinion, or the difference of opinion on the number of children that he had. Most opinions say up to 27 boys and girls, sons and daughters he had from these other wives. Now, obviously, that should pose us to reflect, well, what was it about Ummul Baneen, alayha salam, that we commemorate her death anniversary, but not the others? Right? What about the other children? Were they less important? Probably not. Were they more prominent than the others? Most definitely. Right? But obviously we see that this kind of repeats itself throughout Islamic history. Right? The 8th Imam, or the 7th Imam, I would say, has 35 children, right? Including Imam Rada alayhi salam, and many daughters. But out of all of those daughters, we tend to remember and recollect Sayyidah Fatima Masuma alayhi salam, buried in Qum. The other daughters are not less important, but she holds a higher status based upon the hadith we have, based upon the ziyarat text that we have, where the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam themselves gave these individuals a higher preference or higher priority compared to all of the other individuals that were within these families. So with that said, so Ummul Baneen, we know, first of all, she comes into the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen as his wife much later on in Islamic history. As I said, Sayyidah Az-Zahraa alayha salam is martyred in the 11th year of the Hijrah. Historians again differ, and this is nothing that is kind of shocking, but history has not recorded all of the major events of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, right? History was very much a oral tradition. It later took on a written version or written format, but even there a lot was lost. A lot was not mentioned, a lot was not recorded, because perhaps at that time people didn't find it important to note birth anniversaries, death anniversaries, weddings. These things were maybe more of a contemporary phenomenon. So we have differences of opinions, and I won't go into those tonight because it doesn't really add value to our discussion. But we know that as the wife of Amir al-Mu'mineen, she probably was married around 8 to 10 years after the shahadat of Sayyidah Az-Zahraa alayha salam. And as I mentioned, that she had 4 boys. She had 4 sons from the marriage with Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. We know obviously Abul Fadl Abbas as the most prominent of those, because of the role on the day of Ashura, his stance in Karbala. Obviously he has that preeminence apparently from all of the other children. We also have Abdullah, we have Ja'far, and we have Uthman, 3 other boys that they had. Again, these are all individuals that are loved and cherished based on their role that they played in the event of Karbala. But coming to Baneen alayhi salam, right, how does it happen that Amir al-Mu'mineen marries her? Right, what was the kind of the process of that engagement, of that marriage? At that time, obviously, Amir al-Mu'mineen was not yet the open Khalifa of the Ummah. He was the Imam, obviously, of the nation. Right at the death of the Prophet, we believe Amir al-Mu'mineen was the Imam. He was the rightful successor of Rasulullah. He would not be given that apparent Khilafat leadership until much later in history. But historians tell us that when Sayyidah Az-Zahraa alayha salam was martyred, and obviously Amir al-Mu'mineen had other wives in that 10-11 year period before Ummul Baneen comes on the scene, we're told that Aqil, one of the brothers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, was an expert in genealogy. And this is the common historical narrative that comes out in our books, that Aqil was one of the men who was able to easily trace the lineage of the Arabs of that time. Right? He knew the various tribes, the various backgrounds, what qualities they had. He knew their history going back multiple generations. And so when Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to his brother and he says to him, but look, I'm looking to get married, but not just to an average woman, we could say. I'm paraphrasing this event. These aren't the actual words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But he said, I'm looking for somebody, for myself, for a partner. But it wasn't just about him and this person he's looking for to be married together and live a life of ease and comfort and matrimony. He was looking for somebody that would be there for his son Abu Abdullah on the day of Ashura. And it's not a hidden secret, because the Prophet had talked about Karbala before his own death. So Karbala was a known event that was going to transpire. Amirul Mu'mineen obviously had been given levels of knowledge of the unseen based on what Allah would allow him to have, based on what the needs of the time were. And so he was looking for that individual, that woman who would be able to not only be his life partner, there's no doubt about that, but also to be a woman who would give him those kinds of children that he needed to be there on the day of Ashura. And Aqil, having this knowledge of the genealogy of the Arab communities, he pointed Amirul Mu'mineen, he said, there is this tribe, they live outside of the city of Medina. And he spoke to Amirul Mu'mineen about who they were, about there is a daughter named Fatima within this family. And as was the tradition, and even within our culture today, right, it's very rare that a boy will go directly and propose to the girl. Not that it's not permissible, but it's our cultures, Muslim culture in general, it functions in another way where there's always an intermediary. There is a person who acts as that bridge between the man and the woman. And so Aqil tells his brother, the commander of the faithful, that I can go and meet the family. They live outside of Medina. I'll go there, I'll meet them, and I'll bring up this proposal to the family. Now, to make the long story short, we're told that he goes, he stays there for 3 days. He eats dinner with the family. He's there because that was a tribal custom that they would welcome a guest for 3 days, and then the guest would ask the host, are you here for a purpose? Are you here for some reason, or are you just traveling and you want somewhere to stay? So the discussion ensues, and Aqil says that, no, I'm here to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage for my brother Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So again, to move it on to the next level of the discussion for tonight, the proposal is accepted, right? The father, Hizam, goes to his wife, whose name was Thumama, according to some reports. He goes to his wife, he goes to his daughter and says, this proposal has come. Are you willing to accept it? Do you want to, take on this marriage proposal? And obviously the answer was a resounding yes. And the wedding takes place. Now, fast forward from that. Again, I don't want to go into too much more of the historical details. This is just a very brief preamble of how that union took place. Right? And as I mentioned, that from that union would come 4 blessed children that were there to support Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. But I want to go back, for the time I have left, to look at the verse that I began with. And how does this relate to Ummul Baneen alayhi salam, whose actual name was Fatima? And how does that relate to her relation, her marriage, the family that her and the commander of the faithful brought forth? So this verse that I began with, which comes from chapter number 66, verse number 6. It's a theme that comes out at least twice in the Quran with slightly different wording. But the beginning is pretty much the same, where Allah addresses the believers and He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. He then says, Ku anfusakum wa ahlikum naran. He says, save yourselves and also save your families. Safeguard yourselves and your families from the fire of hell. Now, what is this fire of hell? Allah gives us a very brief description in the verse where He says, وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. This is a fire which is unique because the fuel is the everyday things we see around us. It is people, human beings, it's nas, people who will be going to hell, unfortunately. They are a part of that fuel of the fire. And hijara, stones. And stones are given different commentaries. It could be the idols that people used to worship, that these are now the fuel of the fire of hell. And then Allah goes on to talk about the fact that over this fire of hell are angels who are very stern, who are very determined, they're focused in their responsibility. They're commissioned by Allah to watch over this fire of hell. And then Allah says that La ya'sun Allah ma amarahum wa yaf'aluna ma yu'marun, that they don't disobey Allah in whatever that they are ordered to do. They only do what Allah wants them to do, what Allah orders them to do. Now, this verse, and I just want to mention maybe 1 or 2 points tonight in this. If you'll recall, if you were with us last Thursday night when we had the Shawat al-Shadi Majlis, we talked about this progression in the Quran of creation. We talked about how we were in Alam al-Dhar, in a pre-earthly existence. We talked about the fact that Allah created us. He created Adam and Eve, Adam and Hawa, alayhum as-salam. He then created all of humanity. And then from there, obviously, we talked about the fact that there's marriage and procreation, and then the generations continue to go through the natural process by which Allah has legislated for humanity to move forward. So we had all of those various stages. And so now this verse actually continues in that. Because once you are moving from being an individual to becoming a couple, and if Allah permits to have children, then this verse becomes more relevant and pertinent for that couple specifically, for that family unit, but even generally speaking, because Allah tells us that as believers, we're obligated to protect ourselves, to safeguard ourselves from the fire of hell. And not only ourselves, had it only been that, then maybe we could say it's easy. I can keep away from the sins. I don't have to look at the prohibited, to listen to the impermissible, to speak what is not right. But Allah expands the scope and He says, not only are you obligated to save yourselves, He says, Ku anfusakum wa ahlikum. And also you are obligated to save your families. Right? And that's where this greater challenge becomes, or it begins, because now it's not just about me as an individual. Now it's about my family. I have to help them on that path. I have to make sure that they are walking on that path towards paradise. And that becomes extremely challenging. But it becomes challenging only if we want to make it challenging, meaning that Allah has not left us alone. Allah gave us examples even within the Quran. And this is where it becomes a bit more of an interesting review of the Quran, because we see that out of all of the ways that Allah can teach and guide, is not only does He give us theoretical concepts within the verses of the Quran, but He goes and He breaks down various relationships, various family dynamics within the Quran. So people might say, well, Allah, how would Allah teach me as a husband or as a wife, as a father, as a mother? How would Allah give me the tools that I would need? And we say that, look, Allah gave us multiple stories within the Quran. Right? In addition to all of the various anecdotes and the ayat that deal with religious jurisprudence and Islamic ethics and morality, Allah gives us multiple stories of relationships. Not only relationships in general, but He breaks it down to the most basic of relationships of, for example, the father and son. Right? So you look at the Quran, and we see at least 4 times Allah speaks about a father-son relationship. Right? You have examples of, right at the beginning of Prophet Adam, alayhi salam, with his sons Habil and Qabil, right? The first family on earth, which unfortunately didn't have the best of outcomes, right? With Qabil killing his brother Habil as the very first family that is put on this earth, or that it develops and matures. But there's an example of them. But then we see stories of, as example, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, that he has Ismail, he has Ishaq. He leaves Ismail alayhi salam with his wife Hajra in Mecca. He comes back many years after he is mature, the boy is grown up. And there's an entire beautiful episode of Ibrahim and Ismail, father and son, 2 prophets who are working together. They rebuild the Kaaba. They rebuild this beautiful house of Allah. And you see the love and the connection, the relationship between the father and son in that story. And then you see examples of Prophet Yaqub, right? Prophet Jacob, with not only Prophet Yusuf and Binyamin, but the other brothers that are part of that family. So again, there's about 4 different examples within the Quran of the father-son dynamic, of that relationship. And it's not just as a story that Allah puts that we can read it as a bedtime story to our children. No, it becomes lessons within that of how do a father and son work together. If the father is obligated to save his family and himself from the hellfire, well, what is it within the example of Ibrahim and Ismail, or Prophet Yaqub and Yusuf, or the other stories of, let's say, Luqman and his son in the surah of Luqman, that people can take as takeaways of a father-child relationship. But then you'll say, well, what about the mothers? Right? And we know that in the Quran, very few times does Allah speak about women or mention the mothers of the community. Right? We have a few examples, like the mother of Musa. We have Maryam alayhi salam, obviously the mother of Prophet Jesus, Prophet Isa alayhi salam. And so we get to see these few examples of fathers with their sons, mothers with their sons, and then obviously through the examples of the time of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. We then see that we have the relationship between Rasulullah and his daughter Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Not in the Quran, embodied in direct verses that we could say, okay, here's the name of Zahra alayhi salam in the Quran. But we have the event of Surah Al-Insan, where the family of the Prophet give all of their food away to the needy. So we see some examples of the life of Sayyidah Zahra, maybe not directly with the Prophet. Now, one of the questions that people had asked of commentators of the Quran is that, why does it seem that the Quran is a very male-dominated book? Right? And this was actually an accusation that many of the female companions of the Prophet, that they also brought. They would come to the Messenger of Allah in Medina and say, you know, these ayat are coming about jihad, about struggle, about the war, about the defense. And these are all for the men. Women don't go to fight. All of the verses that the women, this is in the view of the women of Medina, they're saying all of these verses are coming to you, Ya Rasulullah, but they're all addressing the men. Why is there nothing for the women? And Allah revealed verses in honor of this question, I would say. And Allah talked, you know, and He spoke in the, speaking to the men and the women of Medina. But also, you know, if we take this a step further, why is it that there are multiple Quranic narratives of the father-son dynamic, but very few of the mother-son or mother-daughter relationship? And some of our commentators have actually gone on to say that a possibility of this, why is it that there's less of this mention, is the fact that for women, mothers, it's a natural instinct to bring up the children, to nurture the children, to educate the children, to take care of the children. This is almost ingrained in the psyche, in the nature of the woman, in the fitrah of the mother, that when she has that child that she carries for 9 months, and she brings that child into this world, brings a life into this world, that it's almost as if Allah is giving that mother all that she needs to begin to nurture and bring that child up. Whereas with us men, it's not natural. It's not, because we don't have that physical bond with carrying that child for 9 months. And so scholars have this opinion that maybe that's why Allah repeats stories of Ibrahim and his son, Yusuf and his children, Luqman and his son. Right? All of these stories are talking to the men of their relationship because of the fact that the woman, the mother, has a closer affinity, a closer bond to her child, and there's less of a need, in the Quran at least, to further explain that role. And obviously there's always more to learn and more to know of that relationship, but this could be one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided to give these forms of stories in the Quran and not address specifically the role of the mother, because it is a natural instinct that they have. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So as I said, that in the beginning of the Quran we have Adam and Hawa, peace be upon both of them, and what happens with their sons. And at the end of the Quran, or the end of the narrative of the Quran, we have the story of Rasulullah and his daughter Fatima Zahra alayhum salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And in the middle is where a lot of these other stories take place, right? About Prophet Nuh, which I didn't mention, and his son, or any of these other events. And so we get this understanding again that, you know, that the Quran gives us the basics of how to bring up our children. So when Allah says, save yourselves and your families, He's not just leaving it open-ended and saying, now you go and you determine how it is to take care of your family. No, Allah gives us through these examples, when we study the lives of these prophets, the lives that they had with their spouse, with their children, with the community as well, we begin to be able to piece together how it is that we are trying to, or how we should save ourselves and also to save our families. Now, obviously, from there, we realize that the stories of the Quran are from 1400 years ago, from 2000 years ago, from 4000 years ago. And times change, circumstances change. The environment obviously is radically different today than it would have been even at the time of the Prophet. And that's where we have the beauty of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam in how they had guided us, how they brought forth lessons in their sayings, in their practicality, to show us the practical methodology behind the process of raising children, the process of safeguarding ourselves and our families from this fire, as Allah very clearly demonstrates within the Quran. And I'm going to mention, inshallah, just maybe one or two methods that are mentioned by the scholars based upon these lifestyles of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, as we try and understand how it is that Ummul Baneen alayhi salam, a woman who we could say was average or normal, meaning she wasn't of the Ma'sumin, she wasn't infallible like Fatima Az-Zahraa alayhi salam was. She wasn't at that level of obviously being immaculate in her character. But how is it that a woman who comes from a family, an average family, who although had many qualities, who had characteristics, which is why Aqil found her to be the ideal match for the commander of the faithful, how is it that they could bring about this family, these boys that were ready to defend not only Imam Hussein on the plains of Karbala, but even that could be there with Imam Ali alayhi salam in the Battle of Siffin, that could be there with Imam Hassan alayhi salam. It had to be something within the upbringing that they were both giving to the children that allowed their children to be how they were, that we today honor these individuals. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one of the things that our scholars speak about when they look at this issue of the tarbiyah, of upbringing of a family, right, is they say that it really works on two different levels. And we actually see this in the life of how Amir al-Mu'mineen chose his spouse. And so they tell us that it's based on multiple factors, but if we break it down right to the lowest common denominator, it's the nurture and it's nature, right? Now, what does that mean? What that means is when it comes to the aspect of nature, what we understand is that every human being brings qualities into a relationship, right? We're all born as a clean slate, but then based on our family, based on our surroundings, based on the community we grow in, based on our education, on multiple factors, we begin to develop the character that we have, right? Nobody's born with ultra bravery or strength or knowledge. These are things we develop over time. And so when they talk about nurture and nature, they're saying that, well, at the level of nature, a lot of what a person will have is going to be also the genes that they carry. What did their families have? What did for example, their grandparents have? What do the siblings have? What do the uncles have? What do the other members of the family or the extended family have? And so perhaps that's why when Aqil was going to that particular family, when he made his way leaving the city of Medina and goes all the way outside into the desert and to find this family, is he realizes that, look, as much as it's important to have the husband and the wife who are on the same wavelength in terms of religion, in terms of what their goals are in life, in terms of what they're looking for as, in a partner for one another, it's also important to see what the family is about, right? Are they a family that would actually carry on traits and qualities that would go and, make their way into that next generation? And so perhaps, as our scholars mentioned, that's one of the reasons why Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he said he was looking for somebody, and he goes to Aqil, and Aqil has that ability to find the right spouse, is that he makes that determination that that's the way he would take for marriage, because he realizes that who he marries is as important as the actual education, the training, the teaching, right? Today we see in the world that people are, when they're looking for marriage, they're not necessarily always looking for religious qualities. They're saying, well, What money does that person have? Do they have a good job? Are they already on their own 2 feet? People tend to look at the material aspects. And that is important, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't look at the material aspects of somebody, right? But we should never let that be the determining factor between accepting or rejecting a proposal. We have hadith that tell us that if a person comes to you looking for your daughter's hand in marriage, and you have investigated into the person, and you're satisfied with their deen, with their religion, with their adherence to the religion, then let that proposal go forth, let that marriage happen. Because as a community, the hadith says, if we don't do that, we will run the risk of having corruption spread within our society. So yes, looks are important, no doubt. You have to live with that person for the rest of your life. Wealth, to an extent, is important. Obviously, the husband has to support. But at the end of the day, if the person doesn't have religion, then as the hadith says, that they really have nothing. They might have all the money in the world, but if they don't have religion, they're not going to be generous with their wife. They won't be generous with their children. They'll be very miserly. Right? They may have the good looks, but if they don't have religion to curtail that and keep it under control, then we see what happens when people have extramarital relationships, because they have the ability to, but if they don't have the religion to control them, then that becomes one of the major issues within a relationship. So as Amir al-Mu'mineen did, is he showed us at a practical level with him and the marriage with Ummul Baneen alayhi salam, that it was not only about having a wife who has education and having children that would go to a school, but it was also that aspect of nature, that he wanted to ensure that he was finding the right individual. So that's one of the reasons we could probably say that these boys did what they did on the day of Ashura, and that she was really willing and able to give up her children for the sake of religion. Now the second aspect, as I said, is in addition to that aspect of nature, is also nurture, right? Is ensuring that the right values are taught to that next generation. And we have so many hadith about this, right? And again, I don't want to labor it because of the time, but we have multiple traditions where we look at this issue of upbringing of our children, right? Whether it be going to the right, even right from the beginning, if let's say it comes down to nursing the child or taking care of the children, if the parents aren't able to fully give committed time, where should those children go? Do we just drop them off at any daycare, any system, and let them be brought up in that environment, right? No, but all of those things have to be considered and reflected upon, because yes, we're looking at the aspect of the nature, but also that nurturing of who is bringing them up. In what environment are they learning? Right? Hadith tell us, for example, that the heart of a young man or a young woman, right, is like a fertile ground. Whatever you throw on it, they will accept. Other hadith tell us that when the heart of the young boy or girl, when they're growing, when they're maturing, that whatever you imprint on that is like you're writing on a stone, right? You chisel onto a stone, and that's never going to go away. And on the flip side, the hadith say that if you don't have the right upbringing for the children, it's like writing on water. Right? You write something with a pen on water, it's going to obviously go away. You won't even get one letter written. So that also becomes important, that aspect of where does that training come from? And again, you go back to the event of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Ummul Baneen, peace be upon both of them. We see that they come into that relationship, into that marriage, into that family, being who they are. Right? Again, not only having the theoretical background, but we know that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was not just a man of theory, but he was a man of practicality. Right? He didn't only talk about religion, but he lived the religion. Right? You look at even Najul Balagha, which is just a small excerpt, a small window into the words of the commander of the faithful, and we see how he was able to communicate, right? How even very difficult concepts he could bring down to a very simplistic level to understand. And even for Ummul Baneen alayhi salam, again, although we don't have probably comprehensive biographies written about her, because as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of this is lost in history, a lot of it was not recorded. So we only know those very small fragments of her life. But we are told that her family was known for not only their bravery, not only their courage and all of these other qualities, but they were also people of literature. So they were poets, right? They had that tradition within that family, within that tribe. So she's bringing both aspects of not only having the background of a family that has all these amazing qualities, but she's also bringing that nurturing ability, that to be a mother, to bring up children that would be ready to support, on that day of Ashura. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so if I bring it back to the verse that I began with, again from chapter number 66, verse number 6, where Allah says, O you who believe, Ku anfusakum wa ahlikum naran, wa kuduha nasu wal hijarat. That save yourselves and your family from this fire. And Allah describes what that fire is. That shows us that as believers, we have an active obligation, we have an active responsibility, that when we're looking at the future for, who we want to marry, what kind of a family we want to bring into this world, what kind of a family we want to train for our 12th Imam, that we have to be actively concerned about all of these areas of who we marry, of what kind of a background they come from, of what kind of a knowledge and education base that they have. Are we on the same wavelength in terms of religiosity? And it's difficult, I've had many people tell me over the years, not here but in other communities, that they married somebody and they were both on the wave of Islam and the path of religion, and they both wanted to bring the children up on the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad alayhum as-salatu was-salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But then they say that at some point in their married life, they unfortunately drifted in two different directions, right? And one was more concerned about the dunya, about the material world, and the other one was drifting to or continuing on that path of Islam. And so that's a reality that can happen, right? And that's maybe inevitable in certain instances that may become a reality. But obviously the goal is that they travel that path together. As we again have seen from other stories within the Quran, we see with Amirul Mu'mineen, we see with many other of the examples that we have within Islamic history, that they continued down that path. And when they had that vision from the beginning that they wanted to follow on the path of Ali Muhammad alayhim as-salam, then they were able to, through that dedication and commitment, to continue down that path. And as I conclude for tonight, as we remember Baneen alayhi salam, a mother who came into the house of Amirul Mu'mineen with the name of Fatima. The irony that, Amirul Mu'mineen, his mother is Fatima bint Asad. His wife was Fatima Az-Zahraa alayha salam. And after Shahadat, when he finds another wife, she's also known as Fatima. So Fatima's down the line, a mother that brought him up, a wife that took care of him and his children, Hassan and Hussein and Zainab and Kulthum alayhum as-salam. And then even later, after the death of Lady Zahra alayhi salam, again Amirul Mu'mineen finds another Fatima. And although this Fatima, who we know as Baneen alayhi salam, would never be like Lady Zahra, because who can be like Fatima? Who can be Al-Kawthar? Who can be the one that would be referred to by Allah as the fountain of abundance? Who could be like Lady Zahra, that she would give all of her food away in the way of Allah? Yes, Baneen gave her 4 boys on the day of Ashura, but there was no ayat of the Quran revealed about her. But when Lady Zahra alayhi salam and Amirul Mu'mineen and the family would fast and give all of their food away, that is where Allah would show the greatness of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. But when Baneen alayhi salam, when she came into that marriage and she saw that Amirul Mu'mineen had these children, and even though, if we say that they were married much later on, and even though Hassan and Hussein alayhim as-salam would have been in their mid-20s, and Lady Zainab alayhi salam and her sister Kulthum would be a similar age, but still Baneen would come to Amirul Mu'mineen and she would say that, I don't want you to call me Fatima. I don't want you to call me Fatima for no other reason except for the fact that when Hassan and Hussein alayhim as-salam, when Zainab and Kulthum, when they hear that name Fatima, when they hear you calling me, oh Fatima, maybe their memory may go back to their mother Fatima Zahra alayha salam. Maybe they'll remember that episode where she was pushed behind that door and her rib cage was cracked. Maybe they'll remember the loss of Muhsin. Maybe they'll remember their mother on that deathbed when Ayman was there. Maybe they'll have those recollections of those last few moments when Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was suffering those difficult days. And so Baneen says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, she says to him, "Oh Abu al-Hasan, please from this day forward don't call me Fatima, call me Baneen, the mother of the sons." And definitely this is what happened, because not only did Amir al-Mu'mineen begin to refer to her as Baneen, the mother of the 4 boys or the multiple boys, but we know that later on she would give Amir al-Mu'mineen those 4 boys, and those 4 boys would represent on that day of Ashura. And eventually, brothers and sisters, as that day of Ashura dawned, and as the 4 boys go, and they go to the battlefield, and Abul Fadl Abbas, he loses his right arm, and as he has that bag of water, and he loses his right arm, he makes those words of poetry, and he says that even if Abbas loses his right arm, he will never stop defending his master, Abu Abdullah. And so although Abul Fadl Abbas loses his one arm, he has the alam in one hand, he has the water bag around his neck. And even as he goes back towards the camp and he loses his left arm, he still continues to say those words of poetry that he would never give up in defending his master, Abu Abdullah. Eventually, as Abul Fadl Abbas falls off his horse and he loses his life, we fast forward to those days in Medina when the caravan left Sham, when that caravan leaves Sham to go back to Karbala. And eventually, as that caravan leaves Karbala and enters back into Medina, one of the things that happens, one of the episodes that happens in Medina is where one of the ladies comes to the house of Baneen, and she begins to give condolences to Baneen for her children. And every time this woman says to Baneen, every time she's told that, "Oh, may Allah give you the patience over the loss of one of your sons," she would continue to say, "Well, what about my son Abu Abdullah al-Hussein?" And as she was told about Abbas, and as she was told about Ja'far, and as she was told about Abdullah and Uthman, she would keep saying, "Well, what about my real son Abu Abdullah al-Hussein?" And after she's told that Abu Abdullah alayhi salam also was shaheed on that day of Ashura, Baneen alayhi salam would break down in tears. She would break down in tears and begin to lament and cry. Historians mention that Baneen would hold majalis, she would hold gatherings where she would remember the shuhada of Karbala. She would remember not only her 4 boys, but she would remember Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And she would say these words of poetry. She would say, "O women of Medina, call me not by that name. Don't call me Baneen, because my sons are no longer." She says, "For the lions I bore are now lost to fame." She would say, "I was once called the mother of sons so brave, but now they're gone, taken to the grave. 4 hawks I had, fierce and bold. Their veins were cut and their stories are now told. The spears of the enemies did pierce their hearts. On the ground they lay torn apart. Oh, if I could know, is it true that Abbas's arms were severed too? My son, like Haydar, fought with might against the cowards in the bitter fight. Ali's other sons, lions in the fray, they battled around him on that fateful day. They struck my Abbas on his noble head, his arms already gone, his life blood shed. Woe to my cub, my brave young one, struck down before his fight was done. Had he had his sword, none would dare to face my son beyond compare. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We ask Allah on this night where we commemorate the Wafaat of Baneen alayhi salam for Allah to accept our acts of worship this evening. We ask Allah to accept all of our good deeds. We ask Allah to give the thawab of this majlis to Baneen alayhi salam. We ask Allah to give this thawab of this majlis to her brave sons and all the shuhada of Karbala that gave their lives on the plains of Karbala. We ask Allah to keep all of us and our families, our spouses, our children on the path of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask Allah to forgive us all of our transgressions. We ask Allah to accept us as the followers of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask Allah for all of those mu'mineen around the world who are suffering, for them to have an alleviation from their suffering and difficulties. We ask Allah to allow the mu'mineen, wherever they are, to have victory over their oppressors. And we ask Allah to hasten in the return of our 12th Imam, Imam Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. ماتم حسين.
حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین عباس 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 بیٹا ہے تو علی کا، زہرا کی تو دعا ہے، شبیر تیرا آقا ام البنین ماں ہے، بیٹا ہے تو علی کا، زہرا کی تو دعا ہے، شبیر تیرا آقا ام البنین ماں ہے، ہر صورت و چلن میں حیدر سے نہ جدا ہے، تا حشر تجھ سے قائم دنیا میں بس وفا ہے، عباس 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 تیرے علم کو تھامے ہر شخص کہہ رہا ہے، مظلوم کربلا کا زینب کا واسطہ ہے، پردیسی کوئی ایسا پردیس میں نہ اجڑے، صدقے میں اس کے جس کا گھر بار لٹ گیا ہے، عباس 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 دل کی مراد غازی تیرے علم سے پائے، روتی ہوئی جو مائے تیرے علم پہ آئے، زہرا کے زخمی پہلو کا دیتی ہے واسطہ، فضا کی کنیزی میں ان کا بھی نام آئے، عباس 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 اس وقت جب کہ زینب دربار میں گئی تھی، قاری نمازیوں سے محفل سجی ہوئی تھی، ظالم یہ پوچھتا تھا غازی تیرا کہاں ہے، بالوں سے منہ چھپائے زینب یہ کہہ رہی تھی، عباس 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 شام غریبہ میں جس کا کرتا جل گیا ہے، کانوں سے بالیاں بھی ہے شمر لے گیا ہے، اس بے کسی سے مولا بچی کوئی نہ ترسے، فرش عزا پہ رو کر ہر دل یہ کہہ رہا ہے، عباس 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 جتنے بھی اشک مولا کرتاس پر گرے ہیں، معصومہ کی قسم ہے गाजी फ़कत तेरे है। वो सब रकम करूँ मैं जो ना रकम हुआ हो, अल्फाज वो अता कर यावर से जो पड़े हैं। अब्बा सबा 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 अब्बा सबा 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 या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात।
We'll be having Surah Yasin recited shortly. Before that, if you could please recite Surah Fatiha for the following marhumin. Marhuma Nargis Banu Bai Somani, who passed away in Dubai on Monday. Marhuma was sister-in-law of Nargis Somani of Vancouver. And Marhum Sayyid Aftab Hussain Zaidi, son of Sayyid Altaf Hussain Zaidi, who peacefully departed in Karachi, Pakistan. Marhum was brother of Sayyid Hassan Zaidi, cousin of brother Taslim Akbar, brother Shamim Akbar, and brother Nasim Akbar. Surah Fatiha.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أأتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جندهم من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعتدناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينصلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقناهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا نبي الله محمد بن عبد الله صلى الله عليه وآله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى ورحمة الله وبركاته. زيارة الإمام الحسين. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث علي أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نوراً في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها، ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. زيارة علي الأكبر عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد، السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد، السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. زيارة الشهداء. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه، السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه، السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله، السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن ابن علي الولي الناصح، السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله، بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. زيارة أبي الفضل العباس عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين، السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي، فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام، فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل، وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. اللهم إني تعرضت لزيارة أوليائك رغبة في ثوابك ورجاء لمغفرتك وجزيل إحسانك، فأسألك أن تصلي على محمد وآله الطاهرين، وأن تجعل رزقي بهم دارا وعيشي بهم قارا، وزيارتي بهم مقبولة وحياتي بهم طيبة، وأدرجني إدراج المكرمين، واجعلني ممن ينقلب من زيارة مشاهد أحبائك مفلحا منجحا قد استوجب غفران الذنوب وستر العيوب وكشف الكروب، إنك أهل التقوى وأهل المغفرة. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. والسلام عليكم يا أئمة المسلمين، علي بن الحسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين، وجعفر بن محمد الصادق، وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم، وعلي بن موسى الرضا، ومحمد بن علي الجواد، وعلي بن محمد الهادي، والحسن بن علي العسكري. والصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيدي يا صاحب الزمان وشريك القرآن وخليفة الرحمن، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك. اللهم كن لوليك ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على